While the miners are still digging below the reactor, Hans Blix, with Soviet authorities, organizes a press conference in Moscow.
Let me say that on behalf of the IAEA, we have expressed profound regret at the tragic accident, the loss of lives, and the damage which has been caused. We have now agreed with the Soviet authorities to come to Vienna for a post-accident analysis.
In front of 500 journalists from all over the world, he announces an international conference that will be held in Vienna, where the Soviets have agreed to share all their data on the disaster.
To analyze the accident.
The most important effect of the press conference was that the Russian people felt that we can believe these guys. They were used to having a government that they didn't believe one word in, and accidents and disasters were usually suppressed. They didn't inform about them. So what they'd heard about this was just kept them worried that it might be even worse. It was bad enough, to be sure. But they felt that, yes, these guys we trust. So this was a victory for glasnost.
The Soviets agreed to cooperate fully with the West, an historic change that begins an era of openness which became known as glasnost, a political victory for Gorbachev, who sorely needs it. Because in Chernobyl, although the fire is now being kept in check, the breach and tons of highly radioactive rubble lie exposed to the elements. It is of the utmost urgency to cover the broken structure and clean up the zone. But for that, more men will be needed, many more men.
Добрый вечер, товарищи.
18 days after the disaster, Gorbachev finally addresses the Soviet people.
Авария на Чернобыльской атомной электростанции. Она больно затронула советских людей, взволновала международную общественность. Мы впервые реально столкнулись с такой грозной силой, какой является ядерная энергия, вышедшая из-под контроля. Вся работа, по сути, ведется круглосуточно. Задействованы научные, технические, экономические возможности всей страны.
The entire country was mobilized. No bureaucratic formalities. If someone had what we needed, we took it. No formalities. We'd worry about the cost later. We took whatever we needed. It was a frontline situation.
General Nikolai Tarakanov is sent to command the land troops.
In 1 year, 100,000 soldiers and officers passed through Chernobyl. They were all reservists. They were summoned up by top administration in their cities and sent to the front.
Military personnel or civilians, officers or simple soldiers, all of them are liquidators, a term invented for the Battle of Chernobyl. Their mission? Clean up, liquidate the radioactivity.
Сначала ходишь первые дни, прячешься, одеваешь маску, а потом уже забываешь, даже на производстве уже забываешь одевать ее. Уже как дома, чувствуешь себя действительно, привыкаешь здорово.
Все улыбаются, все довольны. Водку не продают. Вообще в Москве такой слух был, что на Чернобыль проезжает, водителям каждый день дают 150 грамм этого.
Я с женой разговаривал
150,
и
да.
рассказываю, говорю, в столовую заходишь 150, выходишь 150. Она, ты хоть закусывай там.
Igor Kostin was one of 5 war reporters authorized by the Kremlin to cover the battle. A first in a country that kept everything hidden. 3 of his colleagues are now dead.
There were no titles, no ministers, generals or soldiers. No one was saying, I'm a general, do what I say. Everyone was honestly doing what they could. And so the operation named the liquidation of the Chernobyl accident was set in motion.
100,000 troops, as well as 400,000 civilians, workers, engineers, nurses, doctors and scientists from every Soviet republic passed through Chernobyl. the Soviet Union is waging its last major battle.
500,000 people. The troops in Chernobyl were bigger than Napoleon's, but our army got contaminated.
From the sky, helicopters drop tons of a sticky liquid dubbed Berber, a mixture that coagulates and plasters the radioactive dust to the ground. Meanwhile, brigades of liquidators are put in charge of cleaning up the zone and house by house of removing the layer of radioactive dust that covers everything.
Создавались специальные бригады охотников.
Special hunting squads were formed. They patrolled the countryside and forest with rifles, killing cats and dogs.
All the animals have to be killed because when they wander through the highly contaminated zones, their fur soaked up the radioactivity. They could contaminate the liquidators. The last villages with people still remaining in the zone are evacuated. The houses are knocked down one by one and buried. At night, the trucks, the machines and the men are covered in radioactive dust.
We would wash 5 or 6 times in the shower. We helped each other. We used a hemp glove and the roughest soap available.
Хорошая мочалка и самое суровое хозяйственное мыло, которое стирает белье солдатское. Там очень.
We scrubbed away.
Голова, все тело по 5-3 раза, пока уже не устаешь.
We put on new clothes, then we ate. We ate really well there, because you need to keep your strength up to fight the ionizing radiation. Ionizing radiation seeks out the weak spots in your body.
Организм должен быть очень крепкий. Очень крепкий. И ионизирующее излучение.
That's where it finds a way in and knocks you out.
И туда стреляет.
Around the plant, a colossal operation is set in motion. It goes on 7 days a week without a single day off. 300,000 cubic meters of contaminated earth are bulldozed into huge ditches and covered over with cement.
This spot, around the 4th reactor, is where the most dangerous missions of the zone took place.
8 weeks after the explosion, the liquidators tackle the heart of the problem. In order to neutralize the toxic waste for the long term and prevent it from spreading even more, the entire blown-out reactor has to be isolated. Lev Bolchakov was one of the engineers who designed the enormous structure that would entirely cover the 4th reactor. A sarcophagus of steel and concrete, 170 meters long and 66 meters high.
It was one of a kind, a unique project. No one had ever built such a structure in a zone this radioactive. You could only work a few minutes at a time. That had never been done before.
It is an enormous challenge. How do you build a monumental structure in a place where humans can work for only a few minutes, or even just seconds at a time? This utterly new situation will require more improvisation from the liquidators and put more lives at risk. It has now been more than 12 weeks since the initial blast at block number 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. To stop the deadly contamination, the final attack is launched. Radioactivity in this sector is so high that only remote-controlled machines can be sent in. But people will have to get the machines into position. Workers can only stay a few minutes without receiving a fatal dose of radiation. With each second, their lives are more and more threatened.
Here's one of the armored vehicles. It looks primitive, but we had to build them ourselves. We lined the cabs entirely with lead to protect our soldiers from the radiation as best we could.
Each metallic piece of the structure is prefabricated, sometimes hundreds of kilometers away, then brought one by one onto the site for assembly. An extraordinary jigsaw puzzle. Beams 150 tons and 70 meters long. Buttresses 45 meters high.
That's the DMAC 4000. Look at the size of this crane. We couldn't work very long on the side, and there was no room for error. The slightest miscalculation, and it would have been impossible to fit it all together.
Despite the extreme conditions, work progresses. 100,000 cubic meters of cement are used to make the structure. But the discovery of a new problem forces the work to a halt. The roof of the plant is covered in highly contaminated pieces of graphite.
Это будет примерно 1000. Вот около вот этого колпака примерно 200. Все, пойдемте. На сегодня хватит нам. Выходим, пойдемте. И ты тоже выходи оттуда.
These pieces of graphite enveloped uranium rods. They've been blown from the reactor during the explosion. One single piece gives off enough radioactivity to kill a man in less than 1 hour. They absolutely have to be gotten rid of before construction continues.
Там очень большие уровни радиоактивного излучения, и поэтому туда подойти крайне тяжело. Ну и зачем туда пускать людей, когда тут может техника сработать?
Robots are sent onto the roof to shove the lethal debris over the edge. 60 meters below, other robots gather it up and bury it in ditches. But after a few days, the ambient radioactivity begins to affect even the machines. Their electronic circuitry can't hold up. They go berserk and break down. One of them hurtles itself into the breach.
Как вы собираетесь его разворачивать? Он же поперек висит.
On the roof, robotic machines are no longer an option. Men will have to replace them. Russian soldiers nicknamed bio-robots for the occasion. This battalion of young reservists is preparing to go up onto the roof of the third reactor for the first time. They're between 20 and 30 years old, all of them reservists called to the front for the most dangerous and deadly Battle of Chernobyl. No human has ever worked in zones as radioactive as this. General Nikolai Tarakanov is in command of the operation and personally oversees every detail, down to the hand-sewn lead suits